I would define Yusuke as the unsung hero of Square's design world. Why? Because Yusuke's involvement in some of Square's later signature games challenged and broke through traditional video game design conventions as a solo artist. Yet he still wasn't given as much acknowledgement as some of his peers during that time. So, who is Yusuke Naora? Yusuke Naora is a Japanese video game designer, character designer, and art director who worked for the then Squaresoft, now Square Enix, ever since Yusuke was involved. Whether it was as a field designer for FF6 or as early as Chrono Trigger, this artist has been a major influence in Square's golden age of visual design. From games like Final Fantasy VII all the way to Final Fantasy 15, many of these titles credited Yusuke for his art direction, his attention to detail, and his ability to enhance character and world settings. This was stretched and honed throughout his career, and through his time at Square, we can see the full maturity of that progress in each of the FF titles going forward. Not only was he a field designer, a character designer, but he was also a CG supervisor as well. Whether he himself directly created some CG sequences can be argued, but nevertheless, Yusuke was the jack of all trades when it came to visual design and delivering technical appeal to these games. Many people variably know Yusuke by his directorial position in many FF games. He's overlooked CG scenes in titles such as Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, and even was directly involved in casting real-life actors for the FF15 movie Kingsglaive. But even with all these titles I'm listing, I've come to know him first and foremost as an artist. As an artist myself, I personally relate to Yusuke in many ways, and for this video going forward, I will refer to Yusuke Naora as Yusuke. So personally, I relate to this artist, maybe even more than Tetsuya Nomura at times, which is interesting because style-wise, I try to emulate Nomura's work as intricately as possible when it comes to line work and form. However, in terms of ideas, concept, execution, and most importantly, mind ethic, I retort to Yusuke's work ethic, and I'll explain why in this video. Just a disclaimer, and I want to point out all of this going forward is just my opinion and outlook on Yusuke's work. This is not made to belittle. These thoughts and analysis are just through my lens of discovering Yusuke's work through my own personal journey in character design. Yusuke has profoundly inspired me greatly as an aspiring artist growing up, and I hope to convey my thoughts and analysis through my teens of his character design studies to now. Feel free to agree or disagree. Being at the right place at the right time and given the opportunity matters in the realm of visual media design. And sometimes technically being the best doesn't necessarily hold as much weight as being the most popular. And this is all coming from the consumer's perspective. Well, what do you mean? Please expound. Art is all subject to interpretation. It's all about what's most eye-catching, right? Do people truly care about technical prowess, or do people care more about art that makes them feel something? In the end, it just depends on who you are and what you like. Nomura, I feel, would be in the spectrum of popular artists, given the criteria I just mentioned. And Yusuke would fall into the spectrum of technical artists. I'll explain on this more as we move forward. Interestingly enough, when seeing their work side by side, they are actually quite similar in overall style, flow, and design. They both exhibit similar visual aesthetics as visual artists, but when it comes to groundbreaking contributions to Square's art sector, I feel they start to differ from one another. In essence, I felt that Nomura somewhat overshadowed Yusuke's design contributions due to the explosion and impact of FF7 going forward. And well, for good reason, right? It did well and it was a major success. Nomura was in the spotlight, creating iconic characters such as Cloud and Sephiroth, while Yusuke lingered in the shadows, contributing to Nomura's artistic ideas. With both of them like two sides of a coin, using their respective energies to deliver a great output. A dramatic analogy, I know. It sounds silly, but I want to challenge this ongoing theme as we explore it going forward. So this is not me saying that one is better than the other. It's just me describing the differences, more so in Yusuke's perspective, these two sides of the same coin. So how I first got to know his art was from conceptual background artworks, specifically from Final Fantasy VIII, my favorite FFF, and he helped design the 3 gardens, Balam, Galbadia, and Trivia. He also had a hand in designing key locations and background scenery in the world of FF8. I remember the interesting shapes and organic looks of buildings, roads, towns, etc. They were all eye-catching to me. The bright colors, as if it was laid out like a garden, no pun intended, with different seeds that bloom these intricate locations. References to Italy and London can be found. You can clearly define the fantasy from within the modern day real-life aesthetic. While Naora was at the helm with the character designs, designing Squall and characters such as Laguna, Yusuke was in the background creating these world designs, obviously amongst other artists. Going forward, it was later in FF10 when these ideas started to expand in terms of presentation that I noticed that he too possessed the ability to design characters. So once I found that out, that earned him true respect from me, and I paid attention. I would define Final Fantasy X as being the genesis of what Yusuke could really do as an artist, creating wonderful and lavish backgrounds conceptualized in 8 and expanding more on these ideas of color, more in the organic construct, the world building, and the atmosphere of the world of the now Spira for FFX. At the same time, also showing his abilities to design characters seemingly as well as he could do backgrounds. These pictures, or these pieces of art, still hold up to this day, and FFX as a whole to me is considered a masterclass in showing truly unique design ever, at that time in gaming anyway. So he could do character and background art. Man, what could he not do? What's interesting is that Yusuke's design of Tidus from FFX had a slightly different feel and tone than what we got from the main game. Tidus was originally designed by Naora, and he wanted Tidus' design to reflect the sea and his sunny personality, with colors like yellow, cyans, and blues, all of which opposes the takes of Yusuke's design of Tidus, which Nojima, the writer of FFX, expressed that originally Tidus was initially created to be a rude plumber boy who was part of a delinquent gang. I wonder what we would have got if we stuck with that premise. Nevertheless, the end result was excellent. A little bit of some trivia and going full circle. Ironically, Yusuke was responsible for the cover layout design for the NA box art versions that we got for FFX, using this time Namora's design of Tidus, a cover I had been relentlessly looking at as a kid, wishing to emulate that style growing up, and have both Yusuke and Naora to thank for that. It was thanks to them that got me inspired to draw Tidus almost frequently. So with all these things considered, we know FFX left an incredible legacy and impact, growing and enhancing their tried and true formula and expanding these ideas and designs and becoming a staple in CGI effects. I gotta wonder though, I wonder how Yusuke must be feeling throughout all of this. As a designer myself, thinking about these things as well, I wonder if he wanted the chance to show his designs and ideas and settings just like how Naora did. He may never admit that, but I can't help but feel that Yusuke wanted that. Well, why do you suggest that? He seems super humble and he would never admit that. Well, almost every title that Naora worked on, Yusuke was involved in the background, observing, learning, and absorbing what worked with Naora, with the games integrating his designs. If only there was a chance for Yusuke to be at the helm and doing character designs. I felt if given the chance that he would try to surpass Naora in visual design, with the opportunity in making something better than Final Fantasy VII, to completely break grounds, conventions, process, and direction. I felt he wanted to achieve those things personally, and I say that only by observing the fruits of his later work and what looks to be pieces of art that he's assimilated from his surroundings in that environment going forward. You can inevitably see it in his design. Well, why do I say that? Because from a technical standpoint, because after all, it doesn't matter in the spectrum of the consumer. For the most part, Yusuke has drawn better designs than Naora. I say this as an advocate for Naora. If you guys know me personally, you guys know how much I look up to him. I'm just passionate about this stuff, and sometimes it's hard for me to even admit, but it's true. So to go back to Yusuke, he must have been extremely restless. He must have been longing for a chance to present this unique perspective that has never been done before. To that end, as an artist that identifies with these things, I completely understand where he's coming from. I hope that preface made sense. I hope I can describe this storm of creative friction that can create beautiful works of art, but at the same time possibly illustrate this internal struggle. I would define Yusuke as the unsung hero of Square's design world. Why? Because Yusuke's involvement in some of Square's later signature games challenged and broke through traditional video game design conventions as a solo artist. Yet he still wasn't given as much acknowledgement as some of his peers during that time. What are these great barriers he broke through, you might ask? What do you mean? Can you give examples? Yes, enter Unlimited Saga, and a chance for Yusuke to be at the spotlight. Fine. First and foremost, I love the Saga series. Saga F2, or in this case Saga Frontier 2, being one of my most beloved PS1 games of all time. Now entering the next installment, Unlimited Saga, coming from the artistic cuffs of that. I would define Unlimited Saga to be the definitive peak of Yusuke's visual work and direction as a solo artist, which is fundamentally the most important aspect of Unlimited Saga in my opinion. Unfortunately, if you played this game, however, and you know this game's history, more than likely you know how much this game is not liked. You should also know how much this game is hated. Such is the travesty of Unlimited Saga, the 9th Saga game that wanted to break through traditional and conventional barriers of design. In the end, whether you liked it or not, it didn't meet the growing expectations of video gamers at the time. As for me, I loved it so much that I really appreciated him showing his designs in a bold and beautiful way. Since the game dropped, hence the reception, I've sung praises over its visual design and its still wonderful music, and I still listen to tracks from it to this very day. So what happened? Why did it not reach the acclaim that maybe FF7 had? Well, when marketing and advertising of just showing flashy battle sequences and CGI cutscenes, you would expect a fluid, turn-based Saga game with characters that you would move around and explore in a world setting, right? Wrong. In the end, we got a game that was different than what was advertised. In the end, the game was simply trying to match the feel of a tabletop RPG, essentially like a tabletop board game. I had to admit that I didn't expect that myself, but with understanding what the game and its mechanics are then and still now, I should have lowered my expectations and I might have enjoyed the game a little bit more than the average person. There are plenty of videos describing and analyzing why this game did poorly, and they can describe it and do a proper job better than me and Link, but that's not the point here. In the realm of these titles coming out at the time, was it a good move? Was it the fault of the marketing or the planning of its structure? Maybe, but just for a moment. However, I want to reflect on Unlimited Saga's greatest triumph. I just want to pause my thoughts for a minute and show this opening cutscene from Unlimited Saga for just a moment. To most of you who just watched this, you're probably asking, what's the big deal? It doesn't look appealing. It looks boring to look at. It's lazy in its CGI effects. To the people expecting realism on execution because they're expecting a full-fledged FF8 opening, unfortunately, this is not for you. I only want to demonstrate the importance of style in this demonstration. To some artists seeing this for the first time or again, this intro is beautiful. Well, why? Because of simply how it displays its unique stylistic approach, how it shifted to full motion from an illustration drawn by Yusuke, and the transitions to the introductions of its 7 characters, all which absolutely encompasses beautiful music by the one and only Masashi Hamauzu. I want to stress that this intro was made in the early 2000s with this fundamental approach. They utilized a process called sketch motion, where they would construct 3D models and UV wrap Yusuke's artwork around the models to create this effect. Then in turn would allow the animators to animate these moving illustrated 3D models. Again, I want to stress that this was in the early 2000s, of which they integrated Adobe programs at the time to pull this look off. Now, why is this approach important? What we have here is a demonstration of what we can call today stylistic 3D art. Examples being, in regards to today, titles like Guilty Gear Strive and Arcane, even What If, for example, which have gained great reception, mostly based on a stylistic execution. If anything, it also strengthened the narrative and stories of these properties. Today, we're in an age where things do not have to be realistic in its graphics to be considered good visuals. Going back to this intro though, I couldn't help but ask, who even noticed this? Who even cared? To add to this, the game showcased beautiful digitally drawn sprites, not blocky, pixel animated, but digitally drawn illustrations, which can be considered pixel in another lingo, but they moved. These were mostly digitally drawn and animated by Yusuke himself, digitally hand-drawn, frame by frame. Think about that. Think about how much work that involved. A convention that recent games nowadays have touched. I think of Astria Ascending, for example, or more legacy acts like Odin's Spear or Muramasa. I feel we've only touched the surface of this scale of visual design. But back then, all of these things were taking place with these new design ideas, implementing new ways of creating stylized digital animated art and a hybrid of stylized 3D/sketch design, all which were birthed and pioneered from Unlimited Saga. Yusuke designed one of my favorite groups of characters ever in the RPG media. Still very memorable and one of the most iconic designs from him still to this very day, and I stand by that. From Laura to Ventus, not the Ventus from Kingdom Hearts, which were all fabricated from the different flower colors and the beauty of nature. This mirrored also in his title design. This aesthetic or theme would later thematically help Naora create lavishly beautiful backdrops and environments, all with improv white borders, as if erasing the borders of these illustrations to help the viewer somehow teleport there through consciousness. It seemed to me anyways. So what's the point? Is this the means of defending a bad game? Do you realize how many other titles fall to these means? For the most part, yes. And yes, I recognize this game is considered a failure by many people, but I don't see it as a failure. Far from it. In my eyes, the visual design of Unlimited Saga was for the most part credited to Yusuke and his implementation of trying new things in this game. One of the most misunderstood games ever in Square's library. Growing up, I remember drawing digital illustrations rather in a unique way, trying to mold styles and inspirations from different outlets that I seen as a child, ranging from the simplicity of Cartoon Network at the time, and anime and RPG games, and then trying to put all those styles in a blender and seeing what blossomed. I remember trying to create this new style of shapes and techniques, and Unlimited Saga was one of the enforcers of that movement. The art of Unlimited Saga inspired me that much to do these things. Even finding out the Finding Edges filter in Photoshop that Yusuke utilized in the game, and then me implementing that filter to almost 80% of my own drawings. Unlimited Saga for me was a triumph and a catapult of stylized visual design that gave inspiration and courage to try new things in art. In the end, it's all thanks to Yusuke. It's interesting to note that before development ever took place, Yusuke considered leaving Square to pursue bettering his craft as an artist overseas. It's interesting to recognize that this project was a platform in allowing him to stay with Square and to try new things. Another example or game of what he's not most known for is Last Remnant. Almost everything from the inception of FF7's popularity was trying to break grounds in terms of simply asking the question, is this good enough to contend to Final Fantasy? Does this title have the potential to surpass FF7, maybe FF10, to surpass the standard? Can this hold up? Or can this be better? I felt that Last Remnant was trying to answer these questions, and I remember its presentations and trying to emulate the feel of an FF title, but with a grittier edge, it seemed. One of the most important details to note on the subject, however, is Yusuke's awareness of another RPG at the time, over at the West, made by the folks at Bethesda, called Fallout 3, which was a massive hit universally and an interesting topic to reflect on a different video, a topic to regard the shift of RPGs after FF7 and what happened to the RPG realm in general afterwards. I definitely want to talk about that. What's important to note going back to this topic, however, was that Yusuke purposely used direct references, inspirations, and ideas from Fallout 3 in creating Last Remnant. Think about it. What if Fallout and FF joined together? What would it aesthetically look like? Whether you agree or not, Remnant was trying to enforce that in its fusion. Personally, I thought it was a great effort, and I felt they achieved it. If you thought the story was underwhelming or the battles lackluster, it's subject to many opinions and interpretation, but I personally thought it was solid. I personally thought the battles were done very well, but nevertheless, the visuals screamed, "Look at me. Look at what I'm capable of. Look at my potential." My favorite designs from Remnant are of David, who looks drastically different than the protagonist, with an airflow in his outfit, all while displaying a ridiculously cool eye patch and big guns. Going with the flow again, and because I love fire, I also dig the design of the Conqueror as well. The designs had a more grittier look, and the characters looked even more real, but at the same time keeping that anime aesthetic. I would call this hybrid a realistic anime approach. Remnant was one of the reasons I had an Xbox 360 to play and experience this game, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed its story, and I thought it was just okay in terms of story. But what about everyone else? This is a genuine question I would like to ask all of you watching. What do you think? How did the game make you feel? Tell me your thoughts on it, because knowing these answers are important. Regardless, the effort of implementing outside aesthetics to broaden the appeal of this game should be credited again to Yusuke. This can be argued on also his involvement to Final Fantasy Type 0, which is another game. Type 0 was darker in tone, and its direction was meant to deviate from the traditional FF landscape. It's interesting to recognize that the recent FF16 that's coming out soon also has a dark and mature tone and vibe, and I'm super curious in seeing the execution of these things. We will see what happens. With Type 0, however, I personally haven't played enough of it to really appreciate his works on there. Front Mission 4 and Romancing Saga are other examples of implementing new visual ideas. For Romancing Saga, the idea of 3D stylized art was now being utilized in its core 3D design, from the sprites to their battle animations in-game, which is important to note. Going back to Type 0, however, I do know that this game, or this title rather, was the one game he spent the most time in designing for. I can't help but wonder though, how much did he outdo himself? How many times did he break? How many times did he break mentally just to try to break convention, tread upon new ground? Did it pay off in the end? The sad fate of these games mentioned were all overlooked due to circumstances, marketing, or timing, falling under the wrong place or falling at the wrong time. Later on, he showed his hand in creating character designs for the Chaos Ring series on mobile phones around the 2010s, and were drawn beautifully in my honest opinion. I personally love the designs of his protagonists. The series was also met with the same seemingly subpar reception from the masses like before, but this time in receiving an RPG on mobile phones. The place and the times weren't ready for that transition. A design theory allocates that stylistic design lasts about 10 to 15 years and then drops due to different demands, different people, and a different time. 80s music, for example, do not sound like 90s music, right? Sound design and fashion design change, even as intricate as video presentations change after a 10 to 15 year period. This is a known fact. Certain styles in anime can be traced in that same array of time, and then something else comes from it, or doesn't come from it. Nevertheless, it changes. changes, and an artist must adapt to the shift of change to stay relevant. Hence the popularity of Bethesda's Elder Scrolls and Fallout series eclipsing FF in an interesting place. I want to express the fact that as style and design changes, ideas and stories or ways of thinking in the realm of philosophy do not. Yusuke's last foray in Square was his art directorial role in FF15. I remember an illustration drawn by him and immediately recognized his artwork to celebrating a countdown to the game's release in the form of illustrations by different artists, and I was extremely excited for its launch. As being the director for FF15, I later read in an article describing the process of creating each character in 15 and all the subtleties and minor details in their CG portraits. You know, the ones that are looking forward, those are the ones. From the skin tone to their faces to the subtleties of their hair and their eyes, it's fascinating to hear the subtle details of all the characters mentioned. Every detail matters, even the ones people can't recognize or see. They all matter. Side note, while Naora was responsible for designing Noctis from FF15, incidentally, aged or old Noctis was designed by Yusuke, which is oddly enough my favorite design of Noctis, so God bless Yusuke for that. I wonder in a universe or time that the titles I just mentioned that Yusuke was involved in were finally recognized or acknowledged, or were acclaimed as high as FF7 or given light. The approaches of stylization over realism and the potential ways to break even more conventions. I wonder what that landscape would look like today. This renaissance of style. As I see the current games from Square's library, I wonder if we're in this phase a little too late in the game. Is it too late to change? Can we change? Only time will tell. I found out until recently that he left the company a little afterwards. Maybe he was burned out from designing. Maybe he was tired of the politics. Maybe he was tired Square never utilized his ideas the way he intended as a designer and not a director. Or maybe it was time to hang the hat. In 2016, he posted the following about Final Fantasy XV's ending on Twitter. Quote, "After 24 years I've worked with Square Enix, I left the company on September 30th, 2016. Thinking of family, I will return to my hometown of Izumo. Yesterday, we got to show the ending of FF15 at Tabchan. It has become the best ending. It was my last job. Everyone's amazing. It was the best of my work. It's a little unfortunate that this release date was delayed." Quote, September 30th, and I want you guys to understand this, was what was planned for the initial release of Final Fantasy XV, until it was pushed further into November 29th. I wonder what was truly going on in his mind when he found out about that. When he mentioned that FF15 had the perfect ending, I wonder if he himself felt like Noctis, growing up with his brothers and comrades in Square, learning and understanding his potential, trying new things and making some mistakes along the way, and almost mirroring Noctis's later cocoon-like sleep state, being unaware or conscious of the outside world while being asleep, while growing in power, and then waking up into adulthood, learning your true purpose, and then in turn accepting reality, a reality that you didn't know exists outside your plane of thought. To stand tall even in the midst of the harsh grip of reality, and to come to terms with sacrifice, a sacrifice of something, in this case, life, and you willingly decide to give up your own life to break the cycle in order for the people you love and for the next generation to start over. What an ending to close the book in your own personal journey and career. And man, what a way to go. As tragic as this sounds, even in figurative death, we cannot forget the impact, the visual novelties, the spectacles and services that Yusuke has brought to the forefront of Square's illustrious visual media's history. From the visual design and unique backdrops of FF8 to the lavish designs of a limited saga, I sincerely hope that this not only recognizes his work, but also pays homage to his design philosophy, to engage, to broaden, to break away from tradition, to heighten, to change, but to most importantly, inspire. I hope to incorporate that same philosophy into my own works, and will never forget this most influential and yet legendary artist. I spent a total of 3 days writing this. I know it's cringe to some, but that's how much I love Yusuke's work. I love character design with a passion. And as I reflect on my own writing, in this case, it was on the third day that something hit me as I was seeing other pieces of his work. I realized something. And I realized, perhaps, the most important note of all. It was when he was working with other artists that gave games so much impact. That meant something. This yearning to achieve this greatness was reflected in games that involved him, Naora, and others working together. When games like the original Crisis Core, where he collaborated with Naora, games like FF7 and FF8, where he also collaborated with Naora. Final Fantasy XIII being another example. Them not working together and the effects thereof seemed a little different. Ambitious, but still different. Ambition can sometimes be a lonely path, but with every game that Yusuke collaborated with Naora on, it seemed that these titles received that great reception. And dare I say, that great impact. The impact that made you feel something. Sometimes it's not about being the best or having the most popular art ever to achieve this feeling. The real superpower of Yusuke lies in his ability to make everyone in the team play better, to enhance his comrades' abilities, not to outdo them, but to assemble and join forces with them, to truly break those conventions and those traditions, and then to overcome those odds to create something truly magnificent together. With maybe artist pride and valiant solo efforts worn on his sleeve, maybe this reality was something Yusuke had to accept. I found out that before he departed from Square, he delivered a lecture at the SMU Guildhall College in my hometown of Texas, entitled The Visual Evolution of Final Fantasy, where he discussed the visual changes from creating pixel graphics to 3D characters. As an artist, I relate to what he shared about, but there was one segment in particular that spoke to me, and I hope this gives you perspective, and at the same time, some hope. To close, I'm going to play the snippet from that lecture.
Naora-san has a surprise for everyone. He is going to basically allow us to watch him create a concept art design.
それをちょっと独り言言いながら絵を描くっていうところを見せようかと思います。せっかくテキサス来てだし、なんかバッファローっぽいような感じを取り入れてもいいの。カブトムシみたいな黒さと石のような黒い硬さみたいなのが、なので自分が人一倍やっぱり何倍も考えてイマジネーションを膨らませたりとかしながら、それを徹底的に描いて、それは単純にやっぱり好きなことを仕事にしてる人がやっぱりどうしても多いので、仕事で折れた時に全てが折れる人がすごく多いんですよ。でそれでちゃんとどっかのタイミングでまたその元に戻ってきて、そこで落とし前をつけるというか。
If you've made it this far in the video, I want you guys to pat yourselves on the back. Outstanding job for surviving that entire video of blood, sweat, and tears. This is literally the first time that I've actually wanted to write this, because typically for me, I just free form and I free talk. If this doesn't go well, then I'll probably go back to free talking. But just let me know what you guys think about this. This really was a labor of love for me. I really put a lot of thought into it this time and didn't cover everything that Yusuke did. But this, again, just pretty much caters to my personal journey and my knowledge and my journey of learning Yusuke as an artist myself. So anyways, let me know what you guys think. I appreciate you guys for making it this far again. Thank you to my Patreons, and I will catch you later on the next one. Peace.
Knew I could be my only critic. Really fucked me up and choose your own perspective. Evolved this far enough just to see life at clearance. Wolves howling at the moon, you like the secret weapon. Don't you dare come near me, gather strength to